Hi everyone, I am with Ms. Scheherazade Dubash, who is the Senior Practice Development Lawyer for the International Arbitration Practice at Pinsent Masons. She's currently based in Dubai, although she works with the London team as well. And Scheherazade, thank you so much for being on the Daily Lawyer podcast. While I hope to host Scheherazade for a much longer podcast because there's so much that we can talk to, since I have only 5 minutes with her, I'm going to start with one thing, which is, and we were having this conversation about diversity and about, more women in arbitration and so on. I think I want to lead with a question as to why are we having this conversation in the first place? What does diversity bring to the arbitral process? From an external lawyer point of view or from the tribunal point of view, why are we having this conversation?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure and for addressing this topic, which is a topic that's very important in the arbitration scene and more widely, and also one that's close to my heart. I think diversity in all forms is very important, not just gender diversity. It goes beyond gender diversity as well. But we have to start somewhere, and we're better now than we were maybe 10 years ago in terms of female representation in arbitrations. To answer your question as to what are the benefits of having it, I think having a different perspective on an arbitration panel is really beneficial to parties. If you have an all-male panel, or if we're talking about wider forms of diversity, then I think you're only going to have that perspective. I think it's fair to say that other factors are at play, which perhaps one segment of society may not be well represented.
To them.
Yes. So it brings that added layer of perception, which I think you can only have when you have diversity on a panel.
And what is the current status? I'm not asking you to give me numbers or statistics, but certainly what is the current status of what is happening in the arbitration world, or the ADR world?
So the arbitration world has actually taken a lot of effort and time to bring up the statistics, let's put it that way. And it started very much with movements like the Error Pledge, like ArbitralWomen, who've really sort of championed this cause in terms of empowering women, but also empowering men to empower women, which I think is equally important, because the people that are doing the appointments are not always women.
That's very fair, actually.
So their membership is open to women, and they give a platform to female arbitration practitioners or female arbitrators, and they promote everything that they're doing, whether it's progression in their career or whether they're speaking at conferences or if instructions which are not in arbitration, but if they're public, then that. So they give a fantastic forum, and following suit from their success, there have been other organizations that have emulated, or rather, I like to think, been inspired by that and done more focused efforts for that. So, for example, there's the Indian Women in International Arbitration organization that was launched last year, and I'm very fortunate to be part of that steering committee. And as the name suggests, that is trying to give Indian women the tools to bring themselves up in the arbitration world. And it doesn't have to be Indian women based here. It can be those of Indian origin based anywhere in the world, and bringing them together, essentially creating a forum for them to exchange ideas, to learn about how they, managed to reach their success stories, to share them, to mentor others. So I think it's this sharing of experiences that also gives other women the confidence that they can join those very esteemed other individuals.
I think it's also useful, Scheherazade, when we have organizations like what you just said, and I'm sure there are others, but if you have Indian women as arbitrators or as your external counsel, and coming back to my first question, which is on diversity, there is a sense of relatability that is important. There's a sense of trust. If, as an in-house, I was a litigant to the court system, or I was a litigant to the arbitration system, and I know that sometimes I felt completely not understood by my own lawyers or by the tribunal. So I think that is very useful as well, because they bring a very different perspective to the entire process, and they infuse a measure of trust, which I think is very, very important.
I will say that when we're talking about arbitration, and when we're talking about tribunals in particular, a tribunal should comprise of people that are the most competent to be appointed on it. It shouldn't be based on gender. It should be based on competence, on your technical competence, on your legal competence, on your experience, on your availability. And the pool of people perhaps is narrower in terms of the female representation because the opportunities are not being given to women earlier on in their career to then progress and reach the arbitrator stage. So I think that's something, it's not directly linked to what you've asked, but it's something that I think is important to address, because unless you empower them from the very beginning to take those risks, to appoint them when they're relatively younger, you're not going to see them on those senior panels either.
That's true. And is that something that you're doing with the organization that you're a part of the steering committee in?
We are certainly in that sense trying to empower younger, I shouldn't use the word empower because women should need being empowered, but giving opportunities to women to be recognized and to put themselves forward. That's the entire objective,
yeah.
I would have thought, of organizations like IWIA. But then when I was touching on broader diversity, there's also real racial equality in arbitration lawyers. And they're looking broader than just gender diversity.
Yes.
They're looking at ethnic diversity, geographical diversity.
That is so important. Ethnic and geographical diversity is very important. That's what I was trying to convey with my previous point on culture and diversity in the arbitral process, because that really, they understand where you're coming from. And then, a lot of times arbitration, when they're solving a dispute, it is about, there are questions of fact. And when there are questions of fact, there is an intention behind that fact. To understand intention, you need to understand context. To understand context, you need to understand culture. And that is why I think it's so important to have these kind of conversations. So you mentioned REAL, which is
racial equality in arbitration lawyers. Then I mentioned IWIA, which is Indian Women in International Arbitration. There's ArbitralWomen. There's the ERA Pledge. There's more recently, I heard the launch of the India Promise, which is to have more Indian representation on arbitral tribunals, specifically irrespective of whether the seat is India or elsewhere. So there's quite a lot of movement in this space.
I think that's fabulous. And I'm very excited to get into this topic in a more sort of broader and a deeper way in the coming days. But for now, thank you.